This issue of birthright citizenship, those of you who've been longtime listeners, you know we discussed it at length. I think it was in 2009, 2010, 2015, and we'll hit it again today, just so the facts are on the table. A lot of people are using things that I wrote and said many years ago, so why don't I just do it? Let's talk about birthright citizenship, then we'll get in all the rest of it. Paul Ryan said something today that I thought was quite interesting, being the constitutional scholar that he is. And here's what he said about birthright citizenship and the president. By the way, the president didn't bring it up. I heard one of the miscreants on cable say the president brings this stuff up to divide the nation. First of all, he was asked about it. He didn't bring it up. Secondly, it's not about dividing the nation. It's about upholding the Constitution, okay? Nobody really knows how birthright citizenship was instituted. We've investigated this. It started in the 60s. Bureaucratically, the old INS started to interpret it that way, as the bureaucracy does this all the time. There's been no law passed that conveys birthright citizenship onto illegal aliens. There's been no Supreme Court decision that definitively confers birthright citizenship onto illegal alien children. Nobody's 100% certain how this came to be. But everybody seems to be 100% certain that the president can't fix it. So the executive branch, unilaterally, somehow, somewhere in the bureaucracy, decided to interpret this as it's being interpreted today. Nobody knows exactly who, exactly what office, but there it is. And so when the president is asked about it and says, how did you find out about this? Yeah, we're working on an executive. No, you can't change the Constitution by executive order. Well, does the Constitution confer birthright citizenship on the children of illegal aliens? Of course it doesn't, which I'll explain in a minute. But here's the current Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who was silent for months, but now he feels compelled to speak out. Go ahead.
Well, you obviously cannot do that. You cannot end birthright citizenship with an executive order. We didn't like it when Obama tried changing immigration laws via executive action, and obviously as conservatives, we believe in the Constitution. As a conservative, I'm a believer in following the plain text of the Constitution, and I think in this case the 14th Amendment's pretty clear. Mm-hmm. And that would involve a very, very lengthy constitutional process.
The ignorance on this subject, like so many others, is unbelievable. This is the Speaker of the House, who cares not one whit about the history of the 14th Amendment. Not one whit. You have so-called experts, constitutional experts, professors, former trial judges in New Jersey, who say the same exact thing. Ignorant beyond belief. Illiterate when they come to the 14th Amendment. So I decided, let's play a little piece that I did in 2015. Over 3 years ago. We can go back further, but that's long enough. To provide a basic foundational understanding of what those who wrote the 14th Amendment and ratified the 14th Amendment actually meant. Let's go to cut 18. Go. And yet nobody did a better job at explaining this than Professor Edward Erler, who I've talked about over the years. And he's a professor at California State University. He was also at the Claremont Institute, senior fellow there. But more than that, he happens to be right. And he testified before a subcommittee of Congress many years ago, almost 20 years ago. And he set forth the case. Now, he's not the only one. Professor Thomas West has. Lino Graglia has, professor at the University of Texas Law School. But even more than them, the framers of the Constitution set forth. That is the framers law of the 14th Amendment. Go ahead. Have, after the Civil War, 3 amendments to the Constitution, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, called the Civil War Amendments. And we know pretty much what occurred. Professor Erler was testifying. He said, it's my considered opinion Congress has the authority under Section 5 of the 4th Amendment to define the jurisdiction of the United States, of the 14th Amendment, of course. Indeed, it is my contention that Congress has exercised that power on many occasions, most recently in the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. And I would say they also exercised it with the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. He points out Senator Jacob Howard. You are now going to know more than anybody else, ladies and gentlemen. You know, one of the things I find when I sign books, and it's good to do it because I get to talk to so many of you, people say, Mark, your show is different because you really get into the substance. Now, we have fun. Don't get me wrong. We do our thing, too. But we do really get into the substance. It's one thing to say, yeah. Obviously, the Constitution doesn't provide that. That's not enough. That's not enough. So when you're in a debate format or a political format or a classroom format or this format, you need to back it up. And that's what we do here. We back it up. Senator Jacob Howard, the author of the Citizenship Clause in the 14th Amendment, he spoke. He told us what he meant. He defined who would fall within the, quote, jurisdiction of the United States, unquote. Ready? Quote, every person born within the limits of the United States and subject to their jurisdiction, meaning the states, their jurisdiction, is by virtue of natural law and national law a citizen of the United States. This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers accredited to the government of the United States, but will include every other class of persons. It settles the great question of citizenship and removes all doubt as to what persons are or are not citizens of the United States. This has long been a great issue in the jurisprudence and legislation of this country. Mr. Call Screener, Mr. Producer, you understand that, right? Is it not plain English? Is he not as clear as can be? That it does not include aliens, it does not include foreigners, it does not include families or with ambassadors or foreign ministers. So the author of Citizenship Clause intended to count foreigners, aliens, and those born to ambassadors, foreign ministers as outside the jurisdiction of the United States. That's Senator Jacob Howard. He knew, as his reference to natural law indicates, that the Republican basis, little r, Republican basis for citizenship is consent. Consent of the country. You can't self-immigrate. You can't claim jurisdiction because you happen to walk into the United States. Senator Lyman Trumbull, chairman of the Judiciary Committee and a powerful supporter of the 14th Amendment, remarked on May 30th, 1866, that the jurisdiction clause includes those, quote, not owing allegiance to anybody else. It's only those persons, I'm quoting, who come completely within our jurisdiction, who are subject to our laws, that we think of making citizens, and there can be no objection to the proposition that such persons should be citizens. Now, this was familiar language. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 defines citizens of the United States as, quote, all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, excluding Indians not taxed, unquote. Not subject to any foreign power. It is universally agreed that the immediate impulse for the passage of the 14th Amendment was to constitutionalize the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It was an attempt to put the question of citizenship and matters of federal civil rights beyond the reach of simple congressional majorities. Thus, it is clear the idea of allegiance, not subject to any foreign power, quote unquote, was central to understanding the jurisdiction clause of the 14th Amendment. Now I'm back live. What is the bottom line here? What's nub of this? They wanted to make certain that former slaves would be treated as citizens of the United States because certain states were still resisting. They wanted to make sure that former slaves would be citizens of the United States. They exempted Indians because Indians still, certainly back then, were often considered citizens of particular tribes. But these actually were very forward-looking individuals. They specifically excluded aliens and foreigners. Now, more on this when I return. So Congress in 1870 begins extending offers of citizenship to Indian tribes, most of which agree. So you're a citizen of a tribe and a citizen of the United States. There's a Supreme Court opinion in 1898, United States versus Wong Kim Ark. We've talked about this. I've written about it. And that declared the 14th Amendment adopted the common law definition of birthright citizenship. But the decision conferred birthright citizenship on a child of legal residence of the United States. Now, the majority is broad enough to include children born illegally in the United States as well as legal immigrants. But that's not what the court decided. It wasn't even presented to the court. And so, of course, you have individuals who are trying to read it into it. The court has never decided that illegal alien, that is, the children of illegal aliens, are automatically citizens of the United States. Think of the absurdity of it. Those who passed the amendment specifically rejected the idea. We know who it applied to, the freed slaves. And we know that in the 1960s at some point, the interpretation changed for the executive branch. So, in the 1960s, 1970s, somehow, somewhere, the bureaucracy began not even interpreting the Constitution, just conveying citizenship on the children of illegal aliens. There's absolutely no historical basis for this. There's no constitutional basis for this. There's no statutory basis for this. My buddy Andy McCarthy wrote a brilliant piece at National Review, as he's wont to do, and he said, well, the 14th Amendment has been codified. It was in 1952, I think he said. Well, that doesn't really, in my humble opinion, address the issue. Codifying the Constitution as a way of describing an aspect of a statute is really a pretty frequent practice. It doesn't really lend anything to the interpretation, but we know what the authors of the 14th Amendment meant because they told us. We have no real Supreme Court decision conveying citizenship on the children of illegal aliens. And then we have Paul Ryan. Let's play cut 6 again, Mr. Deuce. And Paul Ryan saying that you can't change the Constitution with an executive order. Who is changing the Constitution? It's the executive branch, the President of the United States, who is the executive branch, taking back the authority to interpret and enforce the 14th Amendment. Go ahead.
Well, you obviously cannot do that. You cannot end birthright citizenship with an executive order. We didn't like it when Obama tried changing immigration laws via executive action, and obviously...
Well, let's stop. Who's changing immigration laws? You know, I brought as a guest here Daniel Horowitz, who's an expert in this area, as he is in many, incredibly intelligent. He writes over at Conservative Review. And Daniel Horowitz, what is Speaker Ryan even talking about?
Well, great to be with you, Mark. And first of all, condolences on the loss of your Patriot dad. He's in a better place.
Thank you.
You know, this is constitutionally illiterate. I cannot relate to what these people are saying. Let's put this in plain English here. Basically, they're saying, Mark, I could break into your home, kick down the door, drop a kid there, and he has the right to live there for the remainder of his life, and there's not a darn thing you could do about it, even henceforth. That's what they're basically saying. It has nothing to do with the president. They're arguing we can't even do this through Congress. The reality is that even if we agree to the notion of birthright citizenship, that there is a legal mandate, a floor requiring Congress and the executive branch to issue citizenship to any child of any legal immigrant under any circumstance, as the court did in Wong Kim Ark, a very activist decision, but let's agree to that. There is no way you could extrapolate that to people who came here without consent. The key words are consent and sovereignty. Nothing ever supersedes that. Nobody could unilaterally assert jurisdiction and make it that there's nothing we can do to stop this. And I think, Mark, more broadly speaking, what the disturbing trend we're seeing is that throughout the last number of decades, past administrations have actually used executive power to subvert sovereignty. It looks like Trump is doing a lot of things executively, but the details matter, and what he's doing is actually pursuant to law. And as you mentioned, there is nothing in statute requiring this, and it all actually happened by accident through laziness and lack of enforcement.
Explain that, because people are under the impression, including the current Speaker of the House, who's taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, and some of these fools on TV who pretend they're experts, they seem to think that the 14th Amendment says what they say it says. Now, we're originalists, and that includes textualists, and you look at the language as intended, as written at the time, and they tell us exactly what they meant, and nowhere do they mean affirmatively giving citizenship to children of illegal aliens.
I think this is where some of our colleagues go awry. Textualism doesn't mean Amelia Bedelia-style literalism.
Right.
Even if it didn't say "and subject to the jurisdiction thereof," if it just said anyone born in the U.S. is a citizen, I got news for them. For 130 years, there's an uninterrupted stream of case law, including cases written by the Wong Kim Ark Justice Horace Gray, saying that if you come here without consent and you do not have legal status, it is in the most literal and physical sense, as if you are standing outside of our boundaries in terms of access to the courts, in terms of rights, in terms of everything. So literally, you are not on our soil. And that is set a law. So when Congress merely cut and paste the text of the 14th Amendment in 1952, they could have never fathomed such an egregious argument that someone
because in 1952, the Constitution was not interpreted as giving citizenship to the children of illegal aliens.
Exactly. It's like saying, prove to me that the 14th Amendment didn't mean to mandate gay marriage. Well, I mean, no one would have thought that. And that's the thing here. The best I could see from my research is that for most of our history, we didn't have too many illegal aliens in the early part of the 20th century. It was in the 60s and 70s and 80s it started to grow. And there was never an active decision. What happened was, because most people are born here, who are born here, are obviously legitimate citizens, and we believe in birthright citizenship for legal immigrants, hospitals never asked any questions, and HHS and the Social Security Administration never clamped down on it on the back end. How do I know this is true? Because everyone agrees that children of diplomats are excluded, right? I mean, that's the whole point, that they're not subject to American law. They have
Everybody agrees, children of diplomats, tourists who just come to the United States, I mean, real tourists, not the sham that we see taking place in some of these places, but just because you're a tourist in the United States, you happen to give birth, doesn't mean that you then cede a birthright citizenship to the United States if you're, say, from Canada.
Exactly. I mean, that's the point. So, there is evidence that there are plenty of children of diplomats that are also being handed citizenship papers, and past administrations have been extremely lax. And in that case, everyone agrees they're not entitled to it. So again, this is a passive act. Trump is actually restoring the real law. This dates back to the Ulysses S. Grant's Attorney General. Just a couple years after the 14th Amendment passed, he said very clearly that this means people subject to complete jurisdiction, not aliens with parents born abroad. There were two other cases before then that said the same thing. This Justice Gray overturned that inexplicably. And this is just the stuff that nobody is willing to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's make something very, very clear about this. They say it's of dubious legality for the president to do this with an executive order. Let's walk through this together. So in the 1960s and 70s, the bureaucracy starts conferring citizenship on the children of illegal aliens, not based on the statute, not based on the Constitution. It takes hold throughout the federal bureaucracy. Who's in charge of the federal bureaucracy, Daniel Horowitz?
The president.
The president of the United States. So a president says, you know what? I'm going to stop this. I'm going to revert. Then, including the leader of the Republicans in the House, they say, you can't change the Constitution by executive order. That's what Obama was doing. We don't do that kind of stuff. Your point earlier, he's not changing the Constitution by executive order. He's not reinterpreting the Constitution by executive order. He's getting the executive branch under control and saying, this is what the 14th Amendment means.
This is what I wrote in my book, Stolen Sovereignty. Literally, we have stolen sovereignty. The executive branch made this decision. Imagine if the people would have voted or Congress would have conducted a vote. We are going to give citizenship to hundreds of thousands of people every year who break into our country against our consent. No one would have ever voted for that. That was a bureaucratic creation. And again, let's zoom back to asylum, to many other changes Trump is making. He's merely restoring the Constitution and the statutes. He's overturning the other administrative lawless acts of previous administrations. You know very well, Mark, and you do this as well, at Conservative Review, we are not in lockstep with everything that any party does. We will call the president out if we disagree with something. But everything he has done in immigration is actually the base statute. It's what past administrations have done to subvert it that he's changing.
So, I mean, as the head of the executive branch, he doesn't need a statute to reverse what the executive branch did without a statute, does he?
No. Unless Congress, the only thing that could happen is Congress, with their naturalization power, could explicitly say, thou shalt give citizenship to all illegals. They could do that. But until they do
won't.
that...
Isn't the problem, though, that the courts might? Aren't the courts out of control? Even these so-called constitutionalists on the court.
To state my unpopular opinion here, I mean, this was my concern about Gorsuch, and I think we've seen that in a very similar sovereignty case in DiMaia v. Sessions. I don't know if we have 5 votes. I doubt Roberts will be with us, but
I don't think Kavanaugh would be with us.
I think, yeah. I mean, I know Thomas would be based on his past writings and his understanding of sovereignty, but here's the broader question: issuing citizenship, birth certificates, that is an executive power. Who's to say that the judiciary has the final say? This is not some, IBM versus Microsoft case or controversy. This is the most foundational national question. And the notion that we're going to cede that to the courts.
But the problem is the courts seize it for themselves. Look what they did to the president when he was simply trying to have a 6-month respite so he could vet people coming here from 6 majority Muslim countries that are spreading terrorism in those countries, where there's civil war in those countries. It didn't even include a majority of Muslim countries with the vast majority of Muslim population. And look what happened in these federal district courts and circuit courts. You have to hold your breath.
Oh, and by the way, since Trump won in Trump v. Hawaii in the Supreme Court, subsequent lower courts have come back and basically repealed that Supreme Court decision. They're just totally disregarding it and putting injunctions on very similar policies. This is what happens, and I don't know the answer for this, when as a society, as a body politic, both the executive branch and members of Congress of both parties say, let's see what the courts say. Well, I mean, if the courts are not a concurrent power, side by side, but standing over them, we have North Korea, and there's no elections. So this is the problem. Yeah, I don't think this will do well in the courts, but again, they would say the same thing if Congress were to do it. Just last week, a district judge said that a statute of Congress making it illegal for local communities to thwart federal immigration law is unconstitutional. Not the president, statute. So I don't know what you do with that.
Well, here we are. But one of the things I'm very pleased about is it sounds like the president is taking this on. Now, I hear some of the race baiters on cable TV. Well, actually, cable TV is filled with race baiters. And I heard one of them say recently that today the president brought this up to create division. The president didn't even bring it up. He was asked about it by a reporter who was interviewing him, who got word that they're quietly looking at this in the counsel's office or maybe at the Department of Justice. And he even said, I don't know how you got that information. And they turn it into a race issue. Of course they're going to, right?
Mark, you know what's tragic about the race issue? And this is really ironic and really sad. The 14th Amendment was crafted to ensure that the Declaration of Independence the vision would actually be actualized, and the bare bone minimum rights, life, liberty, and property, would be given to black American citizens that should have been citizens for many years. They were here for centuries. And instead, that is being bastardized to subvert the actual meaning and disenfranchise all American citizens, black and white and everything else, at the hand of illegal immigrants. It makes no sense. As Representative
Let me just say this, I have to go soon. Let's be abundantly clear about it. That amendment was for black Americans. That amendment was for former slaves. That's it.
Done.
And it was to make sure that they were treated as equal citizens. The whole point of the post-Civil War amendments was to protect former slaves. It had nothing to do with illegal aliens, same-sex marriage, this one, that one, or the other. Nothing whatsoever. So the left pours its agenda into the 14th Amendment, which it's wont to do. Daniel Horowitz, keep up the good work. We much appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks so much. God bless.
And God bless to you, too. You're going to hear spurious arguments that people want to repeal the 14th Amendment. There's nothing to do with repealing the 14th Amendment. You're going to hear spurious arguments that this has been the way it has been for 150 years. That's nonsense. This started in the 1960s. It started in the 1960s when immigration went to hell. The whole rule of law changed. Interpretation of the Constitution's 14th Amendment to apply to the children of illegal aliens didn't take place until over 100 years later. Till over 100 years later. Congress didn't do it. There was no executive order. There was no court decision. The bureaucracy just started doing it. Nobody knows exactly who did it. They just started doing it. That's what progressives do. And now to hear Republicans say, so-called conservative Republicans say, look, you can't change the Constitution with an executive order. Or, we don't do what Obama and the left does, using an executive order in lieu of a statute. Now, I don't doubt that activist judges and courts will make that argument. But for Republicans and conservatives to completely reject the Constitution, to completely reject history, and to claim that the bureaucracy can reinterpret the 14th Amendment, but the president who's in charge of the bureaucracy can't put it back in the box with an executive order, is ridiculous. Again, the courts are out of control, but the president has the right state of mind. And I want to first describe to you the extent to which Jim Acosta is not a newsman, but a hack. Not a newsman, but a hack. Now, he tweeted out, and I paraphrase, that the President of the United States is well aware that he cannot change the 14th Amendment of the Constitution in 150 years of interpretation by executive order. And he's doing this for political reasons to divide the country and blah, blah, blah. First of all, the President didn't bring this up. The reporters interviewing him brought it up. Let me repeat. This is an important fact that Jim Acosta ignores intentionally. The president didn't bring it up. The reporters interviewing him brought it up. Number one. Number two. It has not been the interpretation of the 14th Amendment for 150 years. It had never been the interpretation of the 14th Amendment. It hasn't been interpreted that way yet by the United States Supreme Court. The fact of the matter is the bureaucracy, disparate parts of the bureaucracy, and then the bureaucracy generally began interpreting that way in the 1960s. There's no statutory basis for this. There's no constitutional basis for this. We know what the author of the amendment said. It's in black and white. We know what the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee said. It's in black and white. I've read it. I've reported on it. I've written about it. Had nothing to do with this subject. As a matter of fact, the author of the amendment, the man who drafted it, and the supporters of the Civil Rights Act at the time made it clear that it exempted foreigners and aliens and so forth, which is rational. So when you're interpreting the Constitution, people say, look at the text, look what it says. You look at the text in the context of what the people who wrote it meant. That's an originalist. Now, for the left, they could care less. They pour everything they want into the 14th Amendment, so they don't matter. But the media, which of course is of the left, but it's not supposed to be so ignorant, Jim Acosta, and again to start trashing the President of the United States, who didn't even bring it up. And he was surprised it came up. And he was honest in his response. Yes, we're looking at a potential executive order. To attack him and say, here he is, Mr. Race Baiter again, is sickening. It is beyond belief that the media conduct themselves this way. I'll give you another example. The Anti-Defamation League, which is now headed by a former special assistant to Barack Obama. The ADL, which went left. You've been hearing day in and day out now since the slaughter in Pittsburgh, and you've heard it from the media, that there's been an increase in hate crimes against Jews, anti-Semitism in the United States since Trump was elected. And what did they do? They looked at 2013, 2014, 2015, and then 2016. An increase. 684 cases. Well, why did they start in 2013? How about you start in 2012 when Barack Obama was president? 868 cases. Or how about 2011? 771 cases. Or how about 2010? 887 cases. How about 2009? 931 cases. Or how about 2008 when Obama was elected? 1,013 cases. The highest number since 2002. As a matter of fact, in almost every year of the Obama presidency, hate crimes against Jews was higher than in 2016. Not in every year, but almost every year. Hate crimes against Jews. Did CNN or MSNBC point that out? Did they say that the language that Obama uses when trashing the Prime Minister of Israel, when trashing the State of Israel, the language that Obama and Hillary Clinton and John Kerry used resulted in the rise of anti-Semitism in America? Of course not. Well, why not? And for CNN and MSNBC, who keep talking about the tone out there that may have led to this Jew hater, Trump hater, who slaughtered those 11 Jews, how do we know you didn't cause it? How do we know it wasn't Jake Tapper, report that Jake Tapper did that pushed this guy over the edge? Or Don Lemon? Or Chris Cuomo? Or Camerata? How do we know? How do we know it wasn't any of the hosts on MSNBC? How do we know it wasn't the New York Times or the Washington Post? How do we know it wasn't Chuck Schumer, Pelosi, or Maxine Waters? How do we know they didn't push this guy over the edge? We know that he didn't like Trump. Well, how do we know that it wasn't them and their tone? Now, ladies and gentlemen, to the consternation of some, but not you, my loyal audience, you know I'm a fierce defender of this country. I'm a fierce defender of our principles, our Constitution, our Declaration, individual liberty. I'm a fierce defender of this nation because we are a virtuous people, a virtuous country. No country's perfect. But you don't see Americans pouring into Central and South America to escape America. You see people in Central and South America pouring into the United States to escape their countries and their cultures. All over the world, you see the same thing. People in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, pouring into the United States, not Americans pouring into those places. And we're supposed to pretend that culturally and every other way, we're on an equal ground with them. Well, we're not. This is the shining city on a hill, as Reagan put it. And we all know it. You know, I actually like Paul Ryan. I know this offends some of you. I like the man. Personally, he's a very nice guy. I haven't talked to him in years. But when I have, I've liked him. But I want to invite Paul Ryan on this program openly and publicly to debate this issue of birthright citizenship. Since he made a statement that I contend is utterly and completely bogus on its face. So it would be a nice debate. A nice debate. A civil debate. But his office is listening. He may be listening. I want to invite him on the program. We can debate birthright citizenship, not the politics of it. The Constitution, the 14th Amendment, what the drafter of the 14th Amendment said, what the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee said at the time. I'd be more than happy to debate him on this subject, as well as perhaps he can tell us exactly where the interpretation came where illegal alien children, born in the United States of illegal aliens, obviously, are granted, really summarily, citizenship. Maybe he can tell us exactly how that came to be in the 1960s and 70s and who did that. Maybe he can provide us with a statutory basis for this. Because they're saying, look, the President of the United States is head of the executive branch. He can't reverse any of this. And I'm thinking, well, why can't he? Came out of the executive branch without a statute. It's not based on what the Constitution says. You're going to hear ignoramuses all over TV with law degrees, as professors, as former judges who don't have the foggiest idea what the hell they're talking about. Just like they haven't had the foggiest idea what the hell they're talking about when it's come to Mueller half the time. They have no idea what they're talking about. This is what I know. This is what I know. Better than all the rest of them. And I say that not out of brag, but out of fact. I can't tell you what some activist judge or court will do. They're all over the place. They don't have fidelity to the Constitution. Activism, by its very definition, from a judge or a justice, means that you don't have fidelity to the Constitution. So I can't control that. But you still want to know the rules, right? You still want to know. When the 14th Amendment was adopted, what did they say? When it was drafted, what did they say? What did they mean? That's what constitutional conservatism is all about. Let's see here. Let's take a call. Tony, Nashville, Tennessee, on the Mark Levin app. Go right ahead, sir.
So I had a question. I've been trying to run this down about the case of Wong Kim Ark, and how, I guess they said he had birthright citizenship. Was that somehow related? Were his parents here legally? His
parents were legal residents, Chinese residents, legal residents in the United States. So we're talking about illegal alien children now.
Okay, that's what I was trying to boil all this down to, and I was researching and trying to read, but I couldn't get the backstory on his parents. So
yeah, his parents were here legally. They were legal immigrants. And he was born in the United States. And look, I don't have a problem with that. I think you can certainly find the 14th Amendment, support for that in the 14th Amendment. But even if you do have a problem with it, it doesn't matter. There's a Supreme Court decision. The idea that the president can't reverse what the bureaucracy did in the 1960s without any constitutional statutory authority. He is the executive branch. He's our president. He doesn't have to listen to what the Social Security Administration says or this department or that department. He's the boss. And so the idea now that we need a constitutional amendment or a statute, and the president can't reverse what the bureaucracy did, really by stealth in the 1960s and early 70s, is absurd. That's not to say these activist judges won't compel it, because they're activist judges. They don't comply with the Constitution. But Paul Ryan has no idea what he's talking about, nor do many of the others who sound like him that say, you can't change the Constitution with an executive order. He's not changing the Constitution. He's complying with it. He's complying with the man who drafted the amendment. He's complying with the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's complying with the interpretation of that amendment all the way through until the early 1960s. Anyway, I thought the nation would want to know. Thank you, Tony. Bill, Hayes, Kansas, the great KRMR. Go.
Hi, Mark. Good talking to you. I've listened to you and on your LEVIN TV since the very beginning. I think
Thank
I was
you,
one of your
Bill.
first subscribers.
Thank
anyway, finally, somebody's talking about the 14th Amendment and the babies born in America from illegal parents. Well, I have thought and known from what I've read and studied that 14th Amendment, the reason for it was that the slaves earlier were not considered citizens. This is to consider the slaves and their children citizens. Now,
that's exactly correct.
Why, if they can slip over here from the South and
the
have
former
a baby
slaves,
and that
the
baby's
former
a citizen,
slaves,
but the parents are not, doesn't make a lick of sense. Now they're saying, well, what can the president do? They don't have to do anything. Just properly interpret that 14th Amendment.
That's right. And I don't have a lot of faith in the courts. It concerns me. But the president has to do what the president has to do, and he has to do what he thinks is right. And I don't see why we need a constitutional amendment to reverse what the bureaucracy did by stealth in the 1960s. You don't need a constitutional amendment to undergird a constitutional amendment that means what it says if you understand the text through the original meaning and the legislative history.
Exactly.
All right, Bill. Now listen, you got a big governor's race there, don't you?
Yeah, we do, and I don't think there's a problem.
I hope you're right. All right, my friend. Thank you for your call. Let's see. Rodolfo, Midland, Texas, XM Satellite. Go right ahead.
How are you, Mark? Thank you for taking my call. I just want to speak. I have a lot of friends that are not conservatives, that are not Republicans, or at least they think they're not. They're Hispanics. I myself, I'm of Hispanic heritage. And, we've been fed, as Hispanics, we've been fed garbage from the Democrats. And this caravan coming towards our border, they're finally opening their eyes. They're finally seeing the Democrats what they're out for. Okay, we don't need an invasion, and this is what this is. It's an invasion, and the Hispanics, friends, and people that have.
You're not allowed to use the word invasion. You're not allowed to use the word illegals. They're changing all of our words. Otherwise, you're a racist, Rodolfo. Like I'm an anti-Semite as a Jew, apparently.
They can call me whatever they want. It's an invasion. I'm not a racist. This is my country, this is my homeland, and I'm going to protect it because you know what? I don't know I know where my family came from. We came from Central America. They are not escaping violence. They're not escaping persecution. They're comparing this to what happened to the Jews in Europe. It's totally wrong.
That's pretty sick.
They're looking for the Dolores. That's what they're looking for. So they can send
I don't believe the Jews in Europe were trying to leave Germany and other parts of what the Third Reich was taking over in order to earn a better living. I think they were escaping to try and save their lives as they were targeted.
Exactly, and they're comparing what's going on in Central America to what's happened in the history of the world with real persecution and I mean. Enslavement of people and stuff like that. That's just pure nonsense. They're coming so that they can make Dolores and send back home.
And the Democrats want them because they hope they're liberals. Like they're not really all that worked up about people coming here from Cuba. Have you noticed?
No,
they don't get excited. That's a whole different thing. Because they come out of a communist regime, they tend to be more conservative and so forth. They don't really care for that kind of a refugee.
Mark, the communists in Nicaragua, this is where my family is from, okay? The communists in Nicaragua, the past 3 months, they've killed over 500 students.
It's awful.
500 people.
The Sandinistas.
Yes, and you don't see...
Wait a minute. You listen. Don't you remember when the Democrats embraced them?
Uh-huh.
They thought he was cool with his glasses, his sunglasses... coming to America and all. Don't you remember the Speaker of the House, Jim Wright, thought he was cool, and a whole bunch of the left-wing Democrats embraced him. Ortega.
Let's not forget what Bill Clinton did to the Haitians. he turned them back and he sent them to Guantanamo, and a lot of them sunk in the bottom of the ocean, or they were eaten by sharks. Did they accuse Bill Clinton of being a racist in the 90s? Of course not.
We have a dear friend, really a family member, if you will, who is Haitian. And she despises the Democrats for exactly what you're saying right now.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, my friend, I appreciate your call. Great call. I'll be right back. LEVIN TV is free tonight to all of you. I'd like you to check it out. It's almost an hour long. I did it before the radio program because it's a very, very important show that I did today on LEVIN TV. So all of you subscribing, even those of you who aren't subscribing, today it's available to all of you, including the media. What a joke. But all you LEVINites out there, I'd really like you to take a look at it. It's LEVIN TV. It's in front of the paywall. You know, the great thing about CRTV, by the way, we have all kinds of unique hosts. They don't have regular shows on cable, regular shows on network, regular shows on satellite. They do their only show, for the most part, on CRTV. Phil Robertson, Eric Bowling, I can't remember everybody. Steve Crowder, my buddy. We got a whole bunch, and they're really, really good. So I hope you'll check us out at crtv.com. So LEVIN TV, the entire program this evening, starts in about 4 minutes, is available to you in front of the paywall. Please check it out. LEVIN TV. We also have a wonderful Facebook site at the LEVIN TV Facebook. Why don't you join us there? Please consider Our Police. It's available at Amazon.com and every single bookstore. Our Police. I know your kids are going to love the book. And check us out tomorrow, if you will. We'll be right back right here. Thank you all, and we salute all you heroes out there. God bless you and thank you. See you tomorrow.